For those of you who don't already know me from the previous session, my name is Eric Gardner, and I'm the Director of Educational Programming here at Top Hat. So if you're just joining us now, welcome. And if you tuned into our previous session, we are, of course, delighted to have you back. Now, you could be doing a million other things, right? Reading a novel, maybe conducting some research, getting ice cream, or perhaps more realistically, planning new assignments and maybe second guessing last year's course design. Hopefully not too much of that. But whatever the case, the fact that you've chosen to spend your time with us does mean a lot. So we're going to do our best to keep the summer fun going with another installment of Top Hat Engage Virtual Edition. Speaking of engaging, audience engagement is the name of the game, and we're going to make this session interactive. I know our speaker's got a few questions she plans on asking you, and we're going to be using Top Hat to do so. This is guest mode, is what you're seeing on the screen here, which lets you participate as a student. So all you need to do is scan the QR code, and that's going to launch a browser-based version of Top Hat. So there's no need to download the Top Hat app. Or you can type in the URL, you see it there on the screen, type that into your browser if you're using a laptop or desktop computer, and you can follow along there. And you'll be able to engage with the polling questions that will be coming your way very shortly. So I'm going to give you a moment to do so. But in the meantime, quick bit of housekeeping. We will have time for Q&A. In fact, we're going to sprinkle a bit of Q&A throughout this session. So if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature. They tend to get a bit lost in the chat. And if you have any questions about Top Hat or anything that we do, you can post those there as well. We've got a team ready to answer those. And if you've got ideas, resources, experiences that you'd like to share with those attending today's session, use the chat to do that. It's often a treasure trove of ideas. So, and last but certainly not least, we will be sharing out the presentation recording and the slides for all of our presentations today. And those will go out in our post-event communication. So you can just sort of focus on what our speaker has to say and interacting with some of the fun questions that we have coming your way. So I hopefully have bought enough time for you to get set up with Top Hat guest mode. So now this may be a wee bit premature, but given that the official start of summer is only a couple days away, and we actually had our first proper thunderstorm in Toronto here, where I'm from, just moments ago, so it kind of feels like it's already started. But I thought I would ask you about your summer happy place. So we're going to create a word cloud, so use only one word in your response. So what's the place you associate with summer? Maybe, speaking of our topic, something that sparks joy, induces feeling of rest and relaxation. Maybe it's something from your childhood. Maybe it's a place you plan to visit this summer, but I'll give you a moment to put in your answer, and then we'll reveal our word cloud. Oh, and I see people in the chat as well. Lake, beach, a lot of beach. Hopefully we'll be on a beach for at least part of this weekend, weather permitting, of course. This is Ontario after all. We get 2 days of summer followed by 2 days of spring. That seems to be the cycle right now. So we've got some responses rolling in, which is great to see. Cruise, I see mountains, camp, of course. I spent my formative years going to a summer camp, and I think it really shaped who I am for sure. A lot of fond memories and a lot of jealousy actually when I hear, kids, my parents' friends' kids talking about going off to camp literally in a matter of days. And I really, as much as I love my job, I wouldn't mind being a camp counselor for a couple of months and then coming back to the corporate world afterwards. So, all right, we've got Danielle on the back end who's helping to kind of manage some of the questions and the screen share. So let's see what our results revealed. Oh, I think, and there's our word cloud. So yeah, beach is definitely a winner. Mountains, that sounds amazing. They're a little far afield for us here in Toronto. The garden, of course, pool, backyard, blueberries. I think of that too as well. That's wonderful. So speaking of happy places, one of our goals today is to see if we can make the classroom a happier, more engaging place for you and your students. So teaching should be joyful in a perfect world, feeling alive and transformative for you and your students. But we know that you're navigating a lot of pressures these days, a lot more complexity, student needs are changing. And somewhere along the way, it's kind of easy to lose the spark that made us fall in love with teaching in the first place. So today's session is all about trying to get that spark back. And so that's why we're here, Sparking Joy, Strategies for Happier, High Impact Teaching. We're going to draw from the latest insights in learning science and well-being as well to explore how we can use these tools to cultivate community, foster resilience, and embrace play in our teaching to create environments where both we and our students can thrive. And I can't think of a more insightful or passionate individual to show us how. We are so thrilled to welcome Dr. Sarah Rose Cavanagh to the virtual stage. Sarah's a psychologist, a professor and senior associate director for teaching and learning at Simmons University, where she teaches classes on effective science and mental health and researches the intersections of emotion, motivation, and learning. She's the author of several books, including The Spark of Learning, Energizing College Classrooms with the Science of Emotion, and Mind Over Monsters, Supporting Youth Mental Health with Compassionate Challenge. And I would also note that she wowed the crowd at our in-person version of Top Hat Engage, which occurred earlier this year in Orlando. So we absolutely just had to have her back. Sarah, it is so lovely to see you again, and welcome to the virtual stage.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I am going to take a moment and share my screen. It's okay if I say replace current share, Eric?
Yes, go
Okay,
ahead.
let's get in there. Great. All right. And I feel like for this first item, I was going to start with a little top hat. I feel like Eric has biased you all by asking you your summer happy place and having all those lovely evocations of beach and blueberries and things like this. My interactive question for you, just to get us warmed up, is which season do you prefer? And I thought I would ask this question because I'm actually part of a writing group and we have a group chat. And I have been restricted to only twice a year being able to say, come and get your season, folks, whenever I get too hot, whenever it goes above 85 degrees, because summer's not my favorite. So here are our seasons, just to remind you. Are you a winter person, a spring person, a summer person, or a fall person? And I'm going to stop sharing and let Eric open up Top Hat.
All right. Yeah, you can use Top Hat to respond. So there's the poll you can see on the screen there. Yeah, it's funny. It just got really humid today because I mentioned we had a thunderstorm. So
Yep.
really looking forward to summer like about 6 hours ago. And the humidity hit, and I thought, yeah, you know what?
Yep.
Spring's
Yep.
pretty nice too.
And we have multiple times talked about the ticks as
Oh
well,
yes,
haven't we, Eric?
yes. Sarah and I have tick challenges in
Yep.
common in, where we live.
Awesome. I see a lot of my fall. That's my season. I like spring. Actually, I like all the seasons, but fall is just the best. Little cardigan, new syllabus. It's good
Pumpkin
stuff.
spice latte in hand.
Mm-hmm. I'm more the mulled wine crowd, but I'm the sweet crowd. Uh, now
All
we're
right.
sharing tick stories. Yep.
Yeah.
Ticks. Ah, we won.
Fall one.
Despite your interference, Eric.
I tried to make
Yep.
the case for summer. It just didn't work. All right.
Excellent.
If you want to
Here
take
we
that,
go.
yeah, there you go.
All right. So we are here today to talk about strategies for happier, high impact teaching, which is one of my favorite topics and something I've been doing a lot of thinking about lately. But I do want to just start by acknowledging that it's a little bit of a weird time to be talking about happiness. And I actually put this slide in and a few weeks ago and have been returning the slides, as we all do, tweaking things, taking things out, putting things in. And every time I return to the slide, I was like, oh, it's a good thing I put this slide in because of all these other things that have happened. And I think in higher education, we're feeling a little unmoored, a little uncertain about what is going to happen next. And that can be a hard time to talk about happiness. But I have two inspirational quotes for you that I turn to again and again that I think underscore that in very uncertain times, it's actually the best time to be talking about happiness and to be focusing on the parts of our vocation of teaching and scholarship and learning and dedication to students that that to focus on that, to like really simmer in it and to really underscore it. And this first one's from Adrienne Maree Brown, who wrote a beautiful book called Pleasure Activism. And she talks about the fact that whatever present we're currently living, it was the result of an imagination battle in the past. Two people imagined a different future, or two groups of people, or two movements, and we're now living the outcome of those imagination battles, that we're shaping the future we long for and have not yet experienced. And the only way we're going to do that is by talking about what makes us happy, what makes us well, what is the world we want to live in, and how do we bring it to fruition. In a similar vein, but from a novelist, Michael Chavon, says every universe, including our own, begins in conversation. So let's start having that conversation about the higher education that we want, about the world we want to live in. And I just returned yesterday from a writing retreat that we have at Simmons University, run by my marvelous executive director of our Center for Faculty Excellence, Jennifer Herman. And it's on Cape Cod. And Jennifer just cooks for the faculty all weekend. And so the whole house, the retreat center, smells like apple crisp, and faculty are everywhere just working on syllabi, working on grants. And it's just such a beautiful time. And it just really underscored for me that this is where we need to spend our energy. This is where we need to spend our imagination, in thinking together about how to be better teachers, how to be better scholars. So I'd like you to reflect on a time when everything was going well in the classroom. So we've all had these experiences, right, when we're teaching and things just kind of fall a little flat, or they're not gelling, or students seem disengaged. And then we have these other experiences, right, where everything just hits, everything's going well, we're activated and engaged, our students are activated and engaged, we feel energized, we finish the class, and we're just like, that was awesome. I'd like you to think a little bit. We're going to do another word cloud. What are the defining attributes or characteristics? What predicts that second set of experiences when everything's going really well? What are the defining attributes, the immediate precursors? What's going on?
So yeah, I think we'll try that in Top Hat, see what we come up with.
Mm-hmm.
The chat is also fair game. I'll just call that out. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
Danielle, if you want to get
Oh, football season. That must be the
yeah,
the
that's
seasons. Busy bees. Yes, seeing from their expressions that they're thinking. This is actually something I miss. I teach psychology, I think, as Eric mentioned, and I used to teach in graduate school statistics as part of psychology, but of course it's math. And I really miss teaching statistics because the students would just have that like confused, and then like, oh, look on their faces. And that was the most rewarding part of teaching for me. And you don't get that so much in intro psych as you do statistics, right? It's just a different
actually the
kind of
one
learning.
that was the one math course I took in university, and I felt that everything kind of clicked anyway. So
Yeah.
I can empathize with that. So yeah, we don't actually. I fudged. We don't have a question top hat, so it is what's coming through in the chat here.
Okay, great. Yeah, I love this. Lots of participation, right? Loud, busy bees. Students are asking clarifying questions. Feelings of safety, right? If you're going to participate, you need to feel that safe grounding. Confidence, laughter so important. Really intrigued by laughter. Actually, I took a whole course in laughter in graduate school. It's
I
one of my
like that
favorites.
unforced participation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's coming naturally from the students. All right, great. Even better. So I'm going to bring to you some sources of evidence today. We have kind of three bins. What Eric and I decided was we really wanted this to be a conversation. So I have three kind of ideas or provocations, their community, challenge, and play. So I'm going to share a little bit in each one, and then we'll stop for Q&A. And all of this is kind of supported by evidence that I reviewed from my most recent book, Mind Over Monsters. I'm going to bring you some quotes from our students from a qualitative interview study that an undergraduate and I did of 35 other undergraduates from institutions all over the country. I'm going to bring you some science because I'm a psychological scientist and I think everything should be empirical, and also some quotes from experts that I interviewed along the way. So we're going to start with community. And I love that someone in the chat, sorry, I didn't note the name, mentioned psychological safety, right? And if we're going to challenge students and if we're going to play, we first need to feel like it's safe to take risks, like we're not going to be made fun of, that we're not going to fail. And if we do fail, that that sort of failure is part of learning, right? We need to build that community. And this is partly for reasons of belongingness and for reasons of emotions, but it's also that it's crucial for learning. We are, as human beings, we are ultra social creatures, and actually learning is all based in community. We sometimes have more in common with our friends, the honeybees, than we do more individualistic species. And we tend to fear this ultra social side of ourselves, right? A lot of our science fiction has tropes where all of us are thinking alike, where we're too shaped by the group, right? Group think. We have Wrinkle in Time here and Star Trek with the Borg and a lot of zombies, right? They're just like this mindless mass of humans. Doctor Who, we tend to fear this side of ourselves, but actually it is a deeply natural and motivating side of our humanity. And we as human beings, we're constantly synchronizing our behavior, our facial expression, our emotions. And so we synchronize our facial expressions, as my daughter many years ago is doing here with this toy. We synchronize our movement. When we talk together, we tend to start echoing each other's mannerisms. When we walk together, we tend to line up in step. We just naturally coordinate. We also synchronize goals, as these ducks are doing.
I love this. That's for all the people who voted winter for their favorite season.
I was going to say the same thing. Yep. Nope. um, so we synchronize goals and motivation. There's a whole research on what's called mimetic desire and the fact that we want what other people want. When we see someone chasing a goal, we tend to be motivated to chase that same goal. We also synchronize brain activity. This is Talia Wheatley up at Dartmouth College. And she fascinatingly has been studying MBA students who come to Dartmouth College. And they come from all over the world, right? They've never met each other. And then they come to campus and they're about to spend 2 years together, right? Forming friendships, romances, colleagues. And she studies them right at the start of their MBA program, not all of them, but the ones who volunteer. And she scans their brains while they're watching clips like the ducks, YouTube clips that are devised to elicit individual differences. What do you find funny? What kind of politics do you like? What kind of TV? And what she does is then she tracks these people to see who will become friends in real time. And what she finds is that over time, she can predict who will become friends and friends of friends. So you can see social distance 1, 2, 3, based on their brain activity of how they're reacting. And so as we get to know each other, as we form friendships, as we form closeness, we actually start to synchronize our brain activity. And this has been studied in the classroom too. There's some early work with EEG caps showing that the more neural synchrony there is in a class, the more engagement there is. And a classroom is a collective social setting. It is a group of human beings gathering together time and time again over a semester, whether that's in a classroom, whether it's online, whether it's in a lab, working on shared goals together. And so learning is deeply relational. And I've written about this, but so have all these other people. These are all marvelous books have come out in the last few years with this basic premise that if we want our students to learn, we need to care about them as people. We need to elicit their social motivations. We need to connect them with each other. We need to connect them with other people on campus. And students are also, they're synchronizing their emotions in class. And these are some quotes that I promised you from students in that interview study. So the student says, basically, whatever the professor is like reflects on the students and vice versa. If they're feeling some type of way, we're also going to be feeling that type of way, that emotions are spreading. And I loved that students would frequently use words like synergy. They would literally use that word, or vibe, or synchrony. And the student says there's just this feeling you get in a class where participation is crucial, just like you all said in the chat. It's like a synergistic effect. I'm talking to the professor at the same time I'm talking to everyone else. And I love that they draw this direct line between feeling this synergy and being willing to work harder. I'm so much more interested in doing the reading and coming to class prepared and wanting to discuss the material. Or as this student says, it depends on the teacher's mood in the morning, I have to say. Fridays are happier than Mondays. Just fair. So how do we do this? I'm going to share 3 ideas and then I would like to hear your ideas. So we can start with frequent check-ins, right? Building community from the very first day of class and even before class begins, right? Sending out a survey to the whole class, asking what are the challenges you're facing this semester? What's one thing you're excited about in terms of this topic or this class? What would you like me to know? Things like that. Getting to know students. I used to use kind of video introductions, and over time I've found asking students to post on what used to be called Flipgrid. Over time, I've found that students are less and less willing to post videos. And so now I have a PowerPoint version on Google Docs version, where I have some of them post a selfie and like a fun fact about themselves, their major and their name. And so they're all already seeing their other classmates. We talked about in Florida that Eric mentioned, we talked a lot about tending to the emotional climate of your course. And I'm happy to take questions on that. I think that looks like a lot of different things. And finally, practicing inclusive teaching practices. And I have some book recommendations for you. So 2 recommendations and then a question. So community building activities. This is one of my favorite resources out there. This is put together by the group of scholars at the right who are known as Equity Unbound, and they host it on One Higher Ed. And it's all sorts of warm-up activities. There are slide decks, there are videos, there are handouts, everything from first day icebreakers to ways to mix up, think, pair, share. It's a great resource. And then on the inclusive teaching side, 3 wonderful book recommendations for you. And I wouldn't be surprised if you've had some of these folks in some of these Top Hat Engage events. Tracy Addy's book, Kelly Hogan and Vijay Sathi's, and then the Norton Guide to Equity-Minded Teaching, which is also very excellent.
Yeah, we did a webinar with Kelly and Viji.
Perfect.
They're wonderful. And by the way, if anyone's interested in actually looking at, if you go to tophat.com/events, you'll find our webinar recording, so you can actually find their presentation there, which I would encourage you to check that out.
Thank you. All right. So questions and conversation about building community.
So one of the questions that came through in the Q&A, so do you
Mhm.
find different results for students when they're online versus in a hybrid or online setting? Also, with online instruction, is there a difference between like sort of synchronous and asynchronous in terms of creating that community? Any thoughts on that?
Right. For sure. So each of those settings have different affordances, different things you can do, and different things that are going to be more and less effective, right? I have a personal bias toward on the ground teaching just because it's what I've always done. And I feel like there's a certain amount of community building that can be done just in those interstitial moments, right? As students are arriving and you're just having a little like conversation at the end. And what we have to do in online and blended, both synchronous and asynchronous, is think intentionally about how to create versions of that, right? Because they're not going to perhaps happen as naturally. And so one thing I've done when teaching on Zoom, for instance, synchronously, is I found in the beginning during the online pivot, I will log in 15 minutes in advance, and sometimes students will start peppering in, before the class started, but they all turn the camera off and they're all silent. And so I started playing music, and I would put on my slide which Spotify playlist it was, and I would try to like mix up the theme. If Halloween was approaching, it might be something a little spooky, for instance. And then, much like we started with our 2 Q&As in the beginning, or our 2 multiple choice questions, I would have a question of the day that they could answer either out loud or in the chat. And so that sort of created a virtual version of the just arriving into class and being like, oh, hey, how was your weekend? Right. Asynchronous, I find the biggest challenge because of the asynchronousness. But I think there are creative ways that you can use discussion boards. I used one semester Slack, which I know has a lot of, whenever I share this idea, people have a lot of questions about the possible dangers and things that could go wrong with using something like Slack or Discord. With a smaller class where I knew the students, it worked really well. They used it almost like a group text. Where they were just chatting about different things. I had like a questions for the professor, questions for each other, and that created some of that organic interactivity.
So you kind of are maybe subtly poking at this, or it certainly sparked this question for me, like, community building and coming up against the tyranny of content, like that pull to
Mm-hmm.
cover material and to get through the syllabus. And I'm just, I think a lot of faculty have that concern. So I'm wondering what you would say in response to folks saying, I don't know if I've got the time to kind of invest in these sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, my favorite answer to that is because I have some things that I would say about how important it is to both community and you can lose a little content. But I think that one thing that we can do that doesn't lose any content at all is to make the community building content and discipline specific, right? So it doesn't, you don't have to ask people what their favorite season is or their favorite Halloween candy is, right? You don't have to spend 10 minutes doing that. You can have them do an activity in class where they're interacting, where they're being social, that has to do with your content, right? So when I teach in my motivation and emotion class, we have a class on awe, on the emotion awe. And I have them count off and put them in small groups and put the ones over here and the twos over here. And I put big poster boards on the walls, give them markers. And then we go through 5 examples of situations that might or might not evoke awe. And some of them are videos, some of them are photos, some of them are little scenarios I describe. And after each, they debate whether they would feel awe or not. And then if they would, what characteristics would make them feel awe? And they write that on the board on their little post-it sheets. And then at the end of the activity, I ask them to come up with the definition of awe. What are the scenarios that evoke awe? And it usually matches the scientific definition of awe and what evokes awe. And so all of that is very social. There's lots of laughter. Some of the scenarios are really vivid. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of interaction, but I haven't sacrificed any content. I've just guided them through the content in a way that built community.
That's great. I know we've talked about awe. I'm like, I think I want to take that class, Sarah. So anyway, we'll talk about that later. One last question, maybe before we keep rolling along here, came through the Q&A. This is an interesting one. Do you have any tips for jump-starting a more positive community, building sense for students? Because knowing especially that a lot of
Mhm.
students come in with like high rates of anxiety, well, you know this probably better than anyone almost, and also competitiveness too.
Yeah.
Depending on the discipline, but I think we all know certain disciplines are, quite competitive. So I'd love to know what you how you respond to that.
Yeah, I think two different things. One, acknowledging, I think this is embedded in the question. I didn't see who asked this, but it sounds like this person and I are in agreement that starting off on the right foot is really important. I think first impressions matter more than they probably should, right? When students are entering a class for the first time at the beginning of a semester, that you're like, what is this going to be like, right? What are my fellow students like? What are the instructor like? Is the class going to be too hard? Is it going to be engaging, etc., right? And so I think starting from the very first day, starting as you mean to continue, and really prioritizing that building of community the first day. And that's something that I do in all of my classes, and I try to do it in a transparent way. I have a friend people may know, Jessamine Newhouse, and she talks about how we have to people in class. And she has a few slides that she shared with me and I showed my students that talk about all that relational learning bit and say, okay, we're going to do this. You may think it's dumb. You may be like, why am I doing an icebreaker? But it's actually to help your learning and it makes that transparent. And so starting in the very first day, the competitiveness, is really interesting. I think that really requires us to take a look at kind of our grading structures and our rubrics and whether we're scaling or not. I think that we're in control to some degree of how much kind of cutthroat competitiveness there might be in the classroom. I agree with you, Eric, that certain disciplines are just by their nature more like that, and you might have to nudge the students more in the communal direction. But there's also things that we can do, such as, not starting out the class and say, look to your right, look to your left. One of you are not going to be here at the end of the semester, right? That whole thing, which I hear still happens in some classes. So I think those are my two answers, looking at our grading structures and starting off on the right foot.
That's great. Well, we are going to have more breaks for Q&A, so I'll let you to lead the way there, Sarah.
All righty. So that's a lot about community. And for me, building community is also about compassion. And some of my other work, I talk about compassionate challenge and how we need both compassion and challenge. And that is because I think we do need challenge, right? Both to help students learn, but then also because I think challenge is motivating. And for this, I'm going to tell you a story from one of our students, our Student Voices project, rather than a quote. And this is a story of a student named Hannah, or I'll name her Hannah. And Hannah was a psychology major at an HBCU. And in this interview, we asked students a lot about emotions and learning and mental health and motivation. And when we asked her about motivation and classes that she'd really loved and positive emotions, she told us all the stuff that we just said, the synergy, the emotional contagion, just feeling really motivated by the community. And then when we asked her about negative emotions, we said, okay, how about negative emotions? How do they impact your learning? A lot of students told us about negative things, but Hannah didn't. She told us a story. And so she, when she was a first year student, was taking a research methods class. And in this research methods class, she was required to give a presentation. Hannah hated presentations. They made her very anxious. All through high school, she avoided them whenever she could, but it was required. And so she put together a slide deck and she showed up in the first day of class and she started giving her presentation. And she started getting more and more nervous. And she found that as she got more nervous, every time she clicked her clicker, she would take a step to face her slides. So she would click and step and click and step until she had her whole back to the classroom. And she just froze. She stopped presenting. She couldn't breathe. Her heart sped up. She was essentially having a panic attack. And her instructor did not ask her to sit down, didn't pull her into the hallway and kind of let her go for the day, which honestly, if I were in that scenario, was probably what I would have done. Instead, she just coached her through the rest of the presentation. She said, take a deep breath. She said, turn and face me. Forget the slides exist. Forget the other students exist. Just tell me the story of the research article you're presenting on. And so step by step, Hannah finished her presentation. And what she told us is that one experience forever changed the rest of her college career. She said, yesterday in a class, I volunteered to present my project first. That would never have been me during freshman year. So I would say that, yeah, anxiety has impacted the way I learn. It makes me more engaged. And this is such a beautiful story of challenge because I think that this is where students not just learn the material, right? But they're also in our institutions to further their education as human beings. And this was such a powerful moment of growth for Hannah. And she told us another story. She told us not only did this impact her academically, but that another place where she would get very, very anxious was big social crowds. So she loved to go to basketball games, but she'd walk in the auditorium and she'd feel like everyone was just staring at her. She'd hide behind her phone. And after this research methods experience, she was actually more at peace in large social settings as well.
I just want to, I mean, shout out to whoever that professor was for actually
Yeah.
seeing that opportunity and they're running a class. There's probably other presentations that they want to get to, and taking the time and seeing that as such an important moment is wow, an enlightened being, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm sure Hannah will never forget her. One of a lot of us, I think, fade in our students' minds as the years pass, but I bet that's not an experience that she will forget. And this story also pulled out for me something that I found so interesting, which is that both anxiety and motivation actually have a lot in common. And anxiety and motivation are both arousing the body for action in the context of an anticipated demand under some conditions of uncertainty. And whether we spin toward anxiety or motivation in these anticipated demands really is partly, do we have the resources to cope? Because sometimes we don't, and it's just natural that and inevitable that we're going to be anxious. But sometimes we do have the resources to cope, but we don't know it. And if we can shift the interpretation, and if we can help our students shift interpretations, we can spin them more toward motivation than anxiety. And these are just my receipts. The neurobiological concomitants and motivational states. So some differences, but a lot of commonalities between approach motivation, avoidance motivation, and expending effort. And I think that this is another place where challenge becomes so important and the conversations we have with students become so important, because we need to get students to a place where they're not afraid to fail, right? Because learning is all about failure. We try something, it doesn't work out. We try something different, right? And we just scaffold and build the skills. And some of my favorite work on this topic is being done out of Tufts University, where the psychology department, the physics department, and the engineering department are all collaborating to try to get their science students to understand that failure is part of the process of doing science. And they coined this term, which I love, called epistemic vexation. And so this is the vexing, but also pleasurable feeling of not knowing, right? And most of us academics just naturally understand this, right? The torment of the unknown, the joy of going at it, finding pleasure in the mystery. But our students who are, and to no fault of their own, in a society that's encouraging all this competition and perfection and maximizing everything, they are less familiar with this feeling, and we need to move them to understand it, to feel it. And so I think we have a top hat. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, that's a amateur movie. Oh yeah, we do have a top hat this time. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's like, what are the challenges? What are the ways that you challenge your students?
Yep.
So these can be, I think, a bit longer response. So we're not making a word cloud out of this. So I think you can type in a slightly longer response if you like. We'll give you a moment to process too, of course.
I'm going to catch up on the chat while you do that. Well, thanks, people, for dropping the books in the chat.
I see some, yeah, answers are starting to roll in here. This is great. Oh, someone found the emoji button. That's sort of a recent addition, which is kind of fun. So
Well, thanks also for sharing on Jessamine. Service learning projects, just working off the chat.
yeah.
Yes, love those. Challenge gently.
Well, you probably know that study. I don't know if we talked about this before, but it was they had two different groups. I think it was high school students, and they got feedback. And one was they could revise their essay. They said,
Mm-hmm.
"Here's sort of a grade. If you want, I'll mark it again. If you want to revise it, here's a little, improve your grade." And then the other one, it was just a subtle tweak. It was, "I know that you're capable of doing better." Sort of.
Mm,
Now, if you'd like to take the chance, opportunity to revise your essay. So I think the latter group, as you would imagine, not more of those students actually took advantage of the opportunity, and they actually made
right.
significantly more revisions than the other group. And it was just a matter of that one little phrase
Yeah.
leaving us, which I thought was really interesting.
Can you send that to me? I don't think I do know that. And that's like a perfect compassion challenge, right?
Yeah, it's I can dig it out. It's I don't know if you ever read The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath.
Mm,
Anyway, they've written a number of some marketing books and leadership books. Anyway, that was one of the stories that they shared, but I can dig that out for you.
yeah, that's great.
All right, maybe we should reveal the answer. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I teach public speaking, enough said. Yes, I feel like actually that's an idea for a future event, Eric. I feel like we should be taught by the people teaching public speaking because that has got to be the hardest thing with this current generation of students. And you must know things we don't know.
Maybe we,
All right. Hands-on activities, hard
maybe
questions, but with support. Yeah, APA style. As a someone who's taught psychology, I know the struggles to get students to use APA.
I like that, asking them to take a guess at the question,
Mm-hmm.
so just to get that idea of like, hey, if you don't get it right, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Think and try.
I also love Jim Lang in Small Teaching recommends, having students answer questions before you teach the material, right? And his reasoning for that is just to activate prior knowledge and do all this cognitive stuff. But I think it probably also, like this person is suggesting, puts everyone at ease because they don't know yet, right? So there's going to be a lot of guesses. So it's like, okay, in this class, we can just speculate. We don't have to have the perfect answer.
Yeah, that's great.
Oral presentations. Okay, great. So thank you for that. I'm going to go back in. And so just a few ideas I had. One perfectly presages, right? Eric's suggestion, lots of feedback and opportunities for revision, right? And so too often, I think in higher education, we craft a syllabus and you're like, okay, we're going to teach you this module, and then we have an exam, and then forget all that stuff. Then we're going to do second module, second exam, forget all that stuff. But if we actually want students to increase in their skills with particular learning outcomes, we need to give them lots of feedback and have lots of opportunity for revision. I also think another way that we can incorporate challenge is not being inflexible, right? Not having 3 p.m. on a Friday, every assignment, and if you don't submit it, it's a zero sort of guardrails, but also not having endless flexibility. And I think a lot of us kind of experimented with this and ran into some trouble during the online pivot and during COVID, where we kind of threw the guardrails out the window and had endless flexibility. And I think that there were a lot of bumps along the way, both for us and our students, right? It wasn't great for them or it wasn't great for us. So having flexibility with guardrails, one example that I'm seeing more and more, and there's a research article I can send to Eric to send to you by Regan Gurung about buffers, deadline buffers. So having a deadline, and the deadline appears in the syllabus and the LMS, but then there's a buffer period. Students don't have to ask for extensions, but they have a little buffer there, and you decide on the length of that buffer. And they tested this across multiple sections, University of Oregon, and found that students submitted better work, that deadline extension requests went way down, right? Email quieted down, and students were more engaged. And then feeling free to engage in high intellectual challenge, right? But with scaffolding, with compassion, really trying to push our students to the limits of their abilities and even a little bit beyond, having that experience. As we started out in the beginning talking about statistics, where you're pushing and you're pushing and pushing, and then all of a sudden you understand, like that's where learning is. And not being afraid to do that. And if we have lots of feedback and opportunities for revision, if we've built a lot of community, if we have some flexibility, then we can, I think, feel free to challenge our students.
What's interesting, that kind of reminds me of the Hannah example. When you kind of push, it seems so daunting at the time. We
Mm-hmm.
place, and then once you get through it, you kind of look back, and it's sort of manageable.
Yeah.
What we used to think it was kind of stressful and demanding, all of a sudden is something that we can kind of easily get through. So I often think about that in the context of work and things. So question for you here,
Mm-hmm.
on like, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around like how can faculty recognize when a student is disengaging due to stress, like when it's just too much? It's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like that Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, like that flow state is sort of the idea,
Right.
place where it's hard, but it's not, unbelievably difficult, and it's not too easy. So recognize, how do you sort of recognize when a student might be in that place and
Mm-hmm.
respond in a way that actually re-engages rather than sort of penalizes them?
Right. A couple things. I think this is one of the ways that if you have done those pre-semester surveys, that it can really pay back dividends. Because if a student, because how to recognize, I guess I should take a step back, how to recognize that that's happening is usually a remarked change in behavior. Right. A student's been attending every single class for the first month of the semester, and all of a sudden they're missing every other class, or they were participating really well in the beginning of the semester, but they seem to really be pulling into themselves, right? These changes of behavior are usually signals that something's going on with stress or mental health, or just outside the classroom, things are pulling them away from the work of the class. And if we have those pre-semester surveys, one question people often ask on those is, I think I said this in the beginning, is there anything you want me to know that could interfere with your work this
Mm.
semester? And if you have those, a student has a change in behavior and they said in the survey that they're caretaking in the home for a younger brother because their mother's working long hours, something like that, then when you do an email reach out and say, hey, I've just noticed that your attendance has dropped off. I just want to make sure everything's okay. I know that you have a lot going on in the home. Do you want to come to office hours or hop on Zoom and chat this out? How we can get you back on track. So that can be really powerful. I think that this is somewhere, a place where institutions need to do some investment, right? Because a lot of institutions, but not all institutions, have something where there's an alert system, right? So at Simmons, it's called Starfish. So I'm sure there's a bunch of different companies that do this.
Right.
But if a student does have a marked change in behavior, you can also just raise a flag, and it just sends a quick email to their advisor, to their athletic coach, if that's relevant, to their tutor, if that's relevant, and just say, hey, I've noticed you haven't been in class in a while. And if their advisor, for instance, gets multiple of those, then they can also do a reach out, right? But the institution needs to invest in that. And I think finally, another institutional investment, all of this is much easier, of course, if you have a lower course load in terms of how many courses you're teaching a semester, and also if you have a smaller class size, right? I do a lot of talking with different campuses, and sometimes I'll have some of these ideas and people will say to me, Sarah, I'm teaching 5 classes and I have 400 students in my class. I'm not going to notice if a student's attendance drops off, right?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, for both of those reasons, the starfish type thing and how much we're asking of our teachers, institutions need to invest in the mental health of our students.
Yeah, we got a question here, Starfish. I think that is an application, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
that institutions can invest in.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if EAB is the manufacturer of that, or the
Yeah,
creator.
I'm not sure. I think there's a couple competitors because I've heard on other campuses, people have said, oh, yeah, we don't have Starfish, we have XYZ, but not really familiar with all the companies.
And I would say this like bit of a shameless plug for Top Hat, but the fact that you can track attendance in a large lecture,
Hmm.
you can see, are they coming, are they actually engaging with the content, and being able to look at sort of a gradebook view of that. We also produce like a weekly course report, so
Oh,
it flags like the students who are maybe not getting answers correct, and so you can
hmm.
actually initiate sort of an outreach with them. So again, it's another sort of tool in your toolkit to be able to spot some
Yeah,
of the
that's great.
without trying to make the case for starfish or starfish at the
Yeah,
level.
sorry for plugging another company,
Yeah, it might be a
another
little,
company in the
that might be
middle.
like a longer game to play. One question too, and I think you kind of spoke to this a little bit from Mariana. She's talking about, striking that balance between being too strict, but also, but preventing students from asking too often for extensions, extra
Hmm.
credit, these sorts of things. So she's wondering, like, is there a few bullets or something that she might be able to include as she's sort of setting expectations
Yeah.
for the
I,
class?
a couple examples that I liked. So I've seen a couple different versions of the buffers. And sometimes it's just a 48-hour buffer. Sometimes it's a 1 week thing. And I was actually skeptical. I first heard of these at a conference. I was at a table being led by a discussion leader. And she was telling her approach, which was a 1 week blanket extension, she had I think she was doing 4 classes a semester, lots of students. She said she was ready to quit her job. She got so many emails for deadline extensions from her students. And she said when she implemented this, they went down almost zero. She only got a few a semester. And because my question, she started talking about it, and I was like, yeah, but doesn't don't people just ask for an extension on the buffer? Like, doesn't that just push forward
Yeah.
the extension requests? But I guess psychologically it doesn't. It just, if they know the buffer's there, they feel like, okay, they aim for the original deadline and then they have the buffer. Some other models of flexibility with guardrails I've seen that I really like. I interviewed a biology faculty member for a different research study, and she had lots of flexibility with deadlines within modules for her intro bio course. But then at the end of the module, no more flexibility, because she said, you have to know this material to understand this material. So
Yeah.
I can't have you not be submitting your homeworks or assignments. So she had a lot of flexibility, but then it ended and you'd get a 0 afterward. And a final example that I really like is 2-stage exams, because I often hear from faculty, especially in STEM fields, I need to keep high stakes, big exams that are really hard to get my students ready for MCATs or NCLEX or whatever else. And 2-stage exams, you give them that experience, right? You were prepping them for those exams, and they take this really challenging exam. But then there's an opportunity to, again, revision, go back and look at the questions that you got wrong, like type up a little summary of why it was wrong and what the right answer is, and not earn back all of your points, still keeping the weight on the original exam, but earning back some points.
Interesting.
Those are some flexibility with guardrail I like.
Yeah, that's great. I think we should keep motoring. I'm just sort of watching our time here a little bit.
Yep,
So hopefully we'll have time for a few more questions at the end.
absolutely. So my final kind of provocation is about play. And I think play is an area where it's a great demonstration of community and compassion and challenge all at once. I think play just naturally has all of it together, weaves it together. And I dug into a little bit the science of animal play, and animals actually play to learn. It's so tied up in learning. They're experimenting with the world, right? And animals immediately stop playing. Play halts if there's harsh conditions, right? If there's a predator nearby, if there's low resources, there's no more play. And so I think if we want our students to intellectually play, we need to start with community and safety. But then play is all about training for the unexpected, right? If you think back to your own childhoods and what you did for play, right? Cops and robbers and building kingdoms and just rough and tumble play. It's all about how am I going to encounter unexpectedness, uncertainty, and deal with it. And actually, play is enormously cognitively challenging, right? Because we have to deal with that uncertainty, because we have to deal with alternating status and resources, but we also have to practice a lot of theory of mind, right? Understand our social partners' mental states, predict their next actions, try to map everything out. Play keeps us on our feet. And this is a summary slide from, I did a whole workshop with faculty about intellectual play and challenged them to come up at small tables with a definition of play. And this was their definition. Play in the classroom, particularly, is low stakes, fun, engaging, cognitive, social, safe, new, competitive, active, clear learning of subject. And then they had 2 kind of corollaries. The first one is what I love the best. Freedom to engage without judging yourself is
Interesting.
play. I love that. And then low stakes teamwork that is enjoyable is play. And this is a paper looking at improv, literal play in the classroom, having students do discipline-specific improv, and finds that it promotes creative thinking, it decreases uncertainty intolerance, and increases well-being, which I just love. And I think we have to skip this one to get to a few more suggestions. Here are some ways that we can play on the ground classes, those warm-up activities we've been doing, movement, and I shared my awe example. This is the biggest change in my own teaching the last few years, getting students up and moving, decreasing stakes and innovating grading, role play, changes to the routine. And then one thing that the pandemic did gift us, I think, is the development of all sorts of tools. And I don't have to tell a top hat audience this for online teaching, right? There's all sorts of different questions, polls, using the chat, collaborative activities we can do online and in hybrid environments. All right. So I think I'm going to put this slide up and then we can have a final Q&A. So I just want to encourage you to continue the conversation. I am all over the internet. You can find me there at the right. I have my newsletter there, Once More with Feeling, QR code if you want to keep chatting. And I think we have 5 minutes, right, Eric?
Yeah, I think we do. So
Final
maybe,
questions.
yeah, Danielle, if we can take back control. By the way, I've been reading your blog and I love it. So many great
Oh,
articles.
thank you.
Yeah, really great. You're a wonderful writer. So we're actually going to launch a poll because polls are a bit like office hours, right? So they're underused, underrated, and occasionally filled with surprising insights. So before we sort of get back to some Q&A, love to know what you think in today's session. We're always trying to improve the programming that we bring to you. And if you're interested in learning more about Top Hat, there's a self-directed option that you can take advantage of. Or you can we'll give you the white glove treatment as well. You can indicate that, and we'll have someone reach out to you for a guided tour there as well. And if we just go to the next slide before we get back into the Q&A. If you are interested in just trying it on your own, there's a QR code or a URL. Lots of great fun, and it's pretty easy to get started and to kick the tires on what that could look like. So, a few questions for you. Curious about like your view around how play relates to academic courage, and being willing to take sort of intellectual risks, and maybe a little bit about like are there certain points in the semester when you do play knowing that maybe you're going to challenge them a little bit later and you want to sort of lay that groundwork? I'm just
Yeah, I think it's all tied up because I think play requires a lot of courage, because most forms of play involve vulnerability, and we're scared of vulnerability as human beings. And I think, we can talk a lot about generational differences. I'm not a fan of thinking in a deficit way about this generation and blaming everything on the phones and things like that. But I think that this younger generation, that I am parenting as well, I think that they do have a harder time with vulnerability for whatever reason. And you need to be able to feel vulnerable to play. I think you also, if we think about our academics, you asked about academic courage. If you think about scholars and professors, like I think that we get kind of hardened and crystallized, and what we need is more play, more thinking outside the box, more conversations outside our disciplines, more putting together unusual ideas and unusual settings. And the whole science of creativity, which I think is quite related to play, also shows that creativity is all about connecting unusual connections between ideas from disparate fields and disparate perspectives. And so I think we need a lot of play in the classroom, and I think we need play in our scholarly work. And I don't think that we have to choose play and then challenge. I think play is challenging.
Yeah, that's great. I know, like, certainly, my orientation is a bit more the business world, but certainly when we're having fun, kicking around ideas, being a little bit zany, it's often when the most creative sort of like
Mm-hmm.
come together. And it's usually you've had a lot of fun doing it. When it's a
Yep.
grind, the
Yep.
output's often not quite as good. I have one more question, maybe just to sort of cap things off. I'm wondering, like you've written about sort of stress and disconnection. I know you're working on a new book as
Mm-hmm.
well. How have the last few years sort of changed your perspective on emotional well-being in teaching? And any sort of parting thoughts for our audience today as they sort of think about taking care of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
bringing their best selves to the classroom for their next semester?
Yeah, I think what I really believe, and we touched on this a tiny bit when we were talking about synchrony, is that, and I've talked about this in other settings, and I wrote an essay for the Chronicle of Higher Education about this called They Need Us to Be Well, which was based on a quote from my colleague Eugenia Knight at Simmons. And we were in a fireside chat about supporting student mental health. And I asked her, she's a clinical social worker, I said, Eugenia, what do our students need from us to be well, to have good mental health? How can we help them? And she said, for them to be well, they need us to be well. And so I encourage people to take that to heart, right? And I think sometimes we think, oh, to like better serve our students, to better help them learn, we just have to like throw 1000% of ourselves at our teaching. And I think resting, taking time for yourself, reconnecting with your scholarship, doing all of these things might feel like we're taking that time away from our students, but it's actually going to ultimately serve our teaching better.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.
Oh,
We've got
thank
a
you.
couple like slides just to wrap up. We had an interview on related to this topic with Sarah not too long ago. So we have a podcast called Higher Listenings. And if you haven't tuned in, I really would hope that you do so. We feature a who's who of teaching and learning, including Flower Darby, Jesse Stommel, Jose Antonio Bone, and of course Sarah here. And I think that was easily one of our favorite interviews that we did, and a great way to keep the inspiration from today's session flowing. So we'll send you a link to that in our follow-up communications along with the slides and the recording today if that's something that you want to go back through yourself. So you'll be getting that within the next day or so. And then in terms of, I'm not sure if I'm sharing my screen anymore. Maybe I will share this quickly just so you can see this. We've got our next speaker and our next topic. So we're going to take a short break. We're going to be back here at 3:15. And you're going to hear from Dr. Michelle Cadieux on engaging the masses, transforming lectures into a must-attend event. So Michelle also spoke at our conference in Orlando, and she filled the room. And like her class, I'd say this is a can't miss session. She's going to share some really interesting creative polling techniques and other go-to strategies that have made her introductory chemistry psychology course one of the most popular on campus. So with that, I do hope you'll join us back in 15 minutes. Thanks very much. And thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.